For days, I kept turning that conversation over in my head, trying to figure out what had just happened. I went from feeling defensive and irritated to confused and, honestly, a little ashamed. It wasn't like I wanted to hurt Danny, and I never expected my absence to make such a big impact. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to question my own behavior. Had I really been that dismissive? Had I somehow brushed off years of his hard work with just a few careless words? The thing is, Danny and I weren't just cousins. Growing up, we'd practically been inseparable, despite how different we were. Where he was ambitious and high-achieving, I'd always been the laid-back one, coasting by on good enough while he chased perfection. And he'd always rooted for me in his own way, even when I probably didn't deserve it. When I'd been failing math back in high school, Danny was the one who'd come over every weekend to tutor me. I remember how he'd patiently go through each problem, refusing to leave until I understood. And he was the first to cheer me on when I finally scraped a passing grade. But somewhere along the way, life happened. College, jobs, relationships, and that old closeness faded into holiday visits and the occasional catch-up text. And maybe that's why I'd so easily dismissed his invitation. It had felt like we were different people now with different priorities. To me, it was just another dinner I didn't have time for. But to him, I guess it was something more. It didn't help that every time I talked to other family members, they'd casually mention how disappointed Danny seemed. My aunt even pulled me aside at our next family gathering to say, "You know, Danny was really hurt you didn't show up. He looked for you all night." I had to bite my tongue, resisting the urge to snap back that I had my own life and commitments, and I wasn't just going to jump every time someone held a celebration. But underneath that defensiveness, a new feeling started to creep in: regret. I kept replaying his words, especially that line about how he'd thought it would mean something to me to be there. For the first time, it hit me that he'd genuinely thought of me as one of the people who mattered most in his life. And the fact that I hadn't realized that until now made me feel small. Finally, I decided I'd try to make it right. I sent him a long, sincere text. I told him I was sorry for not showing up, that I didn't realize how much it had meant to him, and that I should have been more considerate. I said something like, "I'm proud of you, Danny. Always have been, even if I don't show it enough." But his response was short and icy. "Thanks, but it would have meant more if you'd been there." The chill in his message surprised me. I'd expected him to brush it off, maybe crack a joke about it all being water under the bridge. That was always our thing. We'd laugh things off. But this time, there was no joke, no it's all good. Just a flat reminder that I hadn't been there when he needed me. It's strange, looking back now, how I convinced myself this wouldn't matter. In the grand scheme of things, I thought people don't remember one missed dinner. But maybe that's just it. It wasn't about the dinner. It was about everything that came before it. The years of unspoken support and camaraderie that Danny thought would mean I'd be there to celebrate his hard-won success. I'd taken his loyalty for granted, thinking it would be there no matter what, not realizing that even the closest relationships need a show of support sometimes. Now a month has gone by, and things between us are still frosty. I thought it would blow over, but I'm starting to worry that maybe it won't. I keep wondering if I'm the one who made this into a big deal by brushing it off like it was nothing. Maybe Danny's been carrying more pressure than I ever gave him credit for, and maybe I was one of the few people who could have made him feel seen in that moment. At this point, every time I talk to our family, it's like there's this invisible wedge between us. They don't say it, but I know they think I messed up, that I should have been there. Part of me wants to just move on, but another part of me feels that weird pang again. The realization that maybe I wasn't as good a friend or cousin as I thought I was. I don't know if Danny will ever forgive me for this, and I don't know if I'm blowing it out of proportion. My partner, Liam, and I decided this year's holiday trip was going to be epic. We'd both been swamped at work, and it felt like the whole year had been one endless grind. So when we finally got the time off, we vowed to go all out. A perfect winter cabin getaway, just the two of us. We split the responsibilities. I'd book the cabin and handle the meals, and he'd take care of the travel logistics and any activities we wanted to do. We talked about it a few times in that casual, "Oh, it'll be fine" way, where you assume everything will just work out because, well, how hard can it be to pull together a cozy weekend in the mountains? I figured Liam would take care of all the minor stuff, and he probably thought I'd plan the big picture details. Somewhere along the line, we both mentally checked out, assuming the other one had everything under control. Weeks went by, and every time it came up, we had this unspoken vibe of we've got this covered. I didn't press him on the activities or ask about the travel plans. I trusted he'd sorted it out. Meanwhile, I was having a stressful month and kept telling myself I'd handle the food situation later. In my mind, I was thinking of throwing together a bunch of snacks, maybe some pre-made meals. I'd seen some winter cabin meal kits online that seemed easy enough, so I mentally bookmarked them without doing much else. Then the weekend of the trip finally rolled around. I packed some quick clothes and a few snacks, and we drove out of town, both of us laughing about how we deserved this break, how amazing it was going to be. About halfway there, I casually asked Liam, "So, what's the check-in procedure for the cabin?" He looked at me, deadpan, and said, I thought you booked it?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "I know, Liam, you were supposed to handle that." His eyes went wide. "No, I thought you were handling the accommodations." We both fell silent, processing the fact that neither of us had booked anything. I was stunned. I had this flash of all those easygoing, "Oh, we'll figure it out" conversations where neither of us actually figured out anything. We both scrambled to look for last-minute options, pulling out our phones to search for any nearby hotels or rentals. But it was holiday season. Everything remotely decent was booked solid. After a full hour of panic searching, we managed to find a tiny, run-down motel by the side of the highway. It was miles away from the dreamy cabin we'd imagined. We checked in, lugged our stuff to the room, and just sat on the bed, staring at each other in exhausted disbelief. Liam was the first to break the silence. "I don't get it. How could you just assume I booked the place?" "Because I thought you had it covered." I shot back, feeling defensive. "I was dealing with work stuff and we said we'd split responsibilities. You were supposed to take care of everything for the trip itself." He sighed, shaking his head. "Maybe if you paid a little more attention, we wouldn't be stuck in a literal highway motel." That did it. "Are you serious, Liam? You can't blame me for this. You were the one who said you'd handle the trip logistics. You didn't check a single detail. Didn't you even think to ask? Maybe confirm things before we were literally on our way." I sat back, fuming, while he looked at me like I was the sole reason our plans had fallen apart. The worst part was that deep down, I could feel a tiny voice telling me that maybe he was right. I hadn't really put in the effort, and I could have done so much more. But I couldn't admit that to him, not when he was looking at me like I'd ruined everything. That night, we sat in the dim motel room, sharing a single granola bar I'd found at the bottom of my bag. I hadn't brought any real food, and Liam hadn't thought to grab any either. The whole thing was one big, sad irony. Two people who'd promised each other an amazing trip, sitting in an uncomfortable bed, too stubborn to admit they both screwed up. The silence was thick with resentment, neither of us willing to make the first move to fix things. I thought he'd be better at handling the details, and he'd thought I'd be more organized. We both let each other down, but neither of us wanted to be the first to say it. I rolled over, feeling both angry and guilty, replaying all the could-haves and should-haves in my head. Maybe it wasn't fair to blame him, but at the same time, I felt like he'd let me down just as much. Or maybe I was just trying to avoid admitting my own failure. To this day, I still wonder, AITA? A few months ago, I got a message from my high school buddy, Evan. We hadn't talked in years, but we used to be close back in the day, sharing big dreams about our future, laughing at terrible movies, and even getting into a few scrapes together. Anyway, he said he'd just moved to my city, but things had taken a rough turn. Job prospects weren't panning out, he was staying in a sketchy hostel, and money was tight. He sounded genuinely stressed, and well, nostalgia got the better of me. I had a spare room, and I figured, hey, a few weeks could help him get on his feet. In the beginning, it was honestly kind of great having him around. We dove right back into our old rhythm, staying up late, talking about everything we missed since high school, reminiscing over old friends and bad decisions. I'd started prepping extra food and making sure the guest room was comfy. I even helped him revamp his resume and lined up a few job boards for him to check out. For about a week, it was smooth sailing. He'd head out every morning with his laptop, saying he was hitting the pavement. He'd come back, talking about the interviews he was scheduling, the gigs he'd applied to. It all sounded promising. I was happy for him, even a little proud to be helping a friend out. But by the end of that second week, things started to shift. He was at home more often than not, glued to his laptop on the couch in his pajamas, binge-watching Netflix. When I'd ask him how the job hunt was going, he'd get defensive, saying things like, "Dude, it's a tough market," or "I'm networking. It just takes time." Meanwhile, the place was slowly turning into his personal lounge. He'd leave takeout boxes everywhere, drop clothes around the bathroom, and even started wearing my slippers without asking. One morning, I stepped into the living room and found him knocked out on the couch, surrounded by chip bags and soda cans like a college kid after finals. I didn't want to be a jerk about it, so I asked him to pick up after himself, and he was like, yeah, of course, man. But nothing changed. I'd come home from work to find my kitchen a disaster, the fridge half empty, and him playing video games like he was on vacation. Once, I couldn't even get into the bathroom because he was on some marathon call in there for hours. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged, saying he'd lost track of time. It felt like he was slowly erasing every boundary I had in place. One day, I came back to find him lounging in the living room with two friends, complete strangers to me, eating pizza, laughing loudly like it was their personal hangout spot. I was so taken aback, I just kind of stood there, not sure what to do. I pulled Evan aside and asked him to give me a heads up before inviting people over, and he acted like I was being the bad guy, rolling his eyes and saying, "Oh, sorry, didn't know I had to get permission to have a friend over." He looked genuinely annoyed, as if I were making some massive deal out of nothing. A few days later, I had a quiet word with him, asking how the job search was really going and suggesting maybe he look into short-term gigs in the meantime, like freelancing or temp work. He got instantly defensive, saying he was above that and that those weren't real jobs. He kept saying he was close to landing something big, that he just needed a little more time. Meanwhile, he was still borrowing my car just for quick errands, which always lasted hours, eating my groceries, and somehow managing to make a mess in every corner of my place. It all came to a head one evening when I came home and found him rearranging my living room furniture. He looked up at me, beaming, and said, "Hey, thought I'd give the place a new vibe, you know?" I was so shocked, I just stared, trying to wrap my head around why he'd think that was okay. I told him, as calmly as I could, that I wanted the furniture back where it was. He gave me a look like I'd asked him to paint the walls pink. When I told him we needed to talk about him finding other living arrangements soon, he completely lost it. He started saying I was bailing on him, that I'd led him on by offering help in the first place. He accused me of being selfish, saying, "Wow, I thought you were better than that," and implying that I was acting all high and mighty just because I had a steady job and a place to live. He finished off by calling me a fair-weather friend and stormed off to his room, slamming the door. Now he's been moping around, barely speaking to me. Every day feels tense and uncomfortable, and I'm counting the days until he's gone, but I can't shake the guilt. Part of me wonders if I was too harsh or if I should have been more patient. But a bigger part feels like I've been used. So I'm left wondering. I'll be honest, I've never been the family-first type. I'm not cold-hearted or anything, but I like my independence, my space. My family has always been pretty close-knit. Everyone knows everyone's business, and big events like birthdays, anniversaries, or holidays are always a production. But for me, it feels suffocating. I have my own life, my own stuff to deal with, and the constant demands for my time and energy are exhausting. So when my cousin announced she was having this big engagement party, I tried to keep a low profile. I knew they'd want me involved in some way, but I had zero interest in dealing with the drama that always comes with these events. My cousin and I have never been that close anyway. Growing up, she was always the golden child in the family. Straight A's, never in trouble, always the one everyone admired. And she loved it too. Loved being in the spotlight, loved playing the role. I wasn't about to be dragged into a whole weekend of celebrating someone who'd never made an effort to understand me, just because we're related. Then, to make things even more inconvenient, the date of the engagement party fell on the same weekend I'd planned to get away with my friends. I'd been looking forward to this trip for months, a chance to relax, unplug, and have some real fun. I knew my family would expect me to cancel, and deep down, I knew it would be a huge deal if I didn't go to the engagement party. But honestly, I didn't care. I was sick of always being expected to drop everything for the family, no matter how it clashed with my life. So I made my decision. I was going on my trip. I didn't tell anyone at first. figuring that I'd just let it be a last-minute issue. But then my mom called, asking me to come over because they were planning a surprise slideshow and needed old family pictures. And that's when it hit me. They actually thought I'd be there, just like that, no questions asked. I decided to be upfront about it. I called my mom and told her, "Look, I'm not going to be able to make it to the engagement party. I already have plans with friends that weekend." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then came the inevitable barrage. What could possibly be more important than family? You only get one chance to be there for these moments. Can't you reschedule your trip? But why should I? No one ever asked if I even wanted to go. It's like everyone just assumes I'll show up and do my part, just because that's what good family members do. But it's my life. I'm allowed to make my own plans, right? And honestly, it wasn't even like it was the wedding. It was just an engagement party. They'd be fine without me. When I didn't budge, things escalated quickly. My cousin texted me, and her message was all passive-aggressive and guilt-trippy, like, "Well, I guess we'll miss you, but I would have thought family was more important than just a random weekend with friends." My mom and dad kept at it too. Every day, they'd ask if I was sure, tell me about how hurt my cousin was, about how disappointed the family would be. By the time my trip rolled around, I felt like I was escaping some prison sentence. My friends and I drove out to this cabin by the lake, and the whole time, I had my phone on silent. We hiked, went kayaking, stayed up late talking around the fire. I felt free for the first time in ages. No obligations, no guilt, just pure relaxation. I'd catch glimpses of notifications lighting up my phone, and I knew it was the family, probably sending me messages about what a terrible person I was. I just didn't care. I felt like I deserved this time. When I got back, it was a disaster. My mom met me at the door, looking like she was about to cry. Apparently, my absence was the talk of the party. People kept asking where I was, and my cousin had to come up with some excuse. My aunt even pulled her aside at one point and asked if I had something against the family. My mom kept saying how humiliating it was, that I put everyone through that stress just for my own selfish reasons. Later that week, my cousin sent me this long text, saying I'd ruined her day and that she felt like I didn't care about her or anyone in the family. And honestly, part of me wanted to fire back, tell her that just because she's the perfect one doesn't mean I owe her my presence at every little milestone in her life. But I didn't say that. I just left her on read. Maybe that was petty, but I felt like I was finally taking control of my life in a way that didn't revolve around what other people wanted from me. It's been a few weeks now, and things are tense. My family hasn't stopped bringing it up, my cousin and I haven't talked, and I keep getting texts from other relatives about how disappointed they are in me. They all act like I did something horribly wrong, but I can't shake the feeling that I did what was right for me. Why should I feel guilty about that? Alright, here's how my friendship with Marcus blew up over what should have been a simple loan. It started pretty casually. Marcus had just moved into his new apartment and was juggling a million expenses. He just bought a car, was upgrading some furniture, getting all set up for his adult life, as he called it. Only, the guy had somehow run out of money before his first paycheck in the new gig even hit. He asked if I could spot him $700 just to get over the hump, and assured me he'd have it back next month, no problem. Marcus and I had been tight since high school, practically brothers. We've been through stuff way tougher than financial hiccups, so helping him out didn't feel like a big deal. Plus, I figured he was good for it. He just landed a decent paying job, and he promised he wouldn't leave me hanging. So, I Venmo'd him the money and told him not to worry about it until he was back on his feet. But here's where things started to get uncomfortable. A month passed, then another, and while Marcus seemed as chill as ever, there was no mention of my $700. Every time I brought it up, he'd brush it off, saying, "Man, I'm just getting settled. Can we talk about this later?" Now, I don't know about you, but $700 is a good chunk of my monthly rent. So I'd start off patient, but couldn't help dropping little reminders every now and then. Nothing rude, just stuff like, "Hey, any update on that loan?" I'd ask every couple of weeks, and each time he'd give me the same line about how he was still working on it. Meanwhile, I was trying not to lose my mind because I kept seeing him posting on Instagram from expensive brunches, fancy cocktail bars, and random weekend trips. I thought maybe I was overreacting, maybe he just needed to blow off steam or something, but still no mention of paying me back. Then came his birthday. He threw this massive party at a rooftop bar downtown, complete with open bar, catered food, and a live DJ. I went mostly because I figured I'd be the one bad friend if I didn't show up, but I couldn't get past the sheer ridiculousness of it all. Here was the guy who couldn't scrape together $700 for me throwing a full-blown extravaganza like he was some high roller. By this point, I was annoyed and probably should have kept my mouth shut, but the drinks had other ideas. I waited until we were standing around with a small group and half-jokingly said, "Well, I hope that DJ's cheaper than paying me back, huh?" I meant it to come off light, but the look on Marcus's face told me he didn't think it was funny. He pulled me aside and said, "What the hell, man? You're seriously going to bring this up at my party?" I was taken aback, but tried to explain that I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I just didn't understand how he was hosting this kind of event when he still hadn't paid me back. He was furious, though, and muttered something like, "God, stop obsessing over money all the time. Friends don't keep score." "Score? This isn't a game, man. You owe me money, and I need it back," I replied, finally laying it out there. I told him it wasn't about being petty. It was about him ignoring my needs while living it up. He looked at me like I'd just insulted his whole family and said, "This is why I didn't want to borrow from you in the first place. You make everything so intense." Now, I was fuming, trying to keep it together while he acted like I was overreacting. But he couldn't leave it alone. He started to go off about how friends should be there without putting pressure and how I should just trust he'll get to it. Meanwhile, I'm thinking, how much longer am I supposed to trust him while he's literally out here spending my money on parties? After that, he started avoiding me, and anytime I tried to talk about the money, he'd either ignore my messages or make excuses. Our friends even got involved, telling me I should just let it go because Marcus had been going through a lot and I was being too hard on him. But let me ask you, how's it fair that I'm the bad guy for wanting my money back? Marcus acts like he's got no clue why I'm frustrated and keeps making me feel like I'm unreasonable. He's all over social media flaunting stuff, and meanwhile, I'm over here cutting back on groceries so I can stay on budget. So yeah, I feel like I'm in this weird position where everyone thinks I should just be chill about it, but how chill am I supposed to be when he's made zero effort? At this point, I'm debating whether to even stay friends with him, since apparently caring about the money I loaned him means I'm not a real friend. The decision to go back to school should have felt exciting. After years of working dead-end jobs and scraping by, I'd finally saved enough for a shot at something better. But there was one big problem. My dad and I had always been close, bonded in a way only two stubborn, small-town guys who'd been through hell and back could be. He'd raised me on his own after my mom left, working 2 jobs to keep the lights on and a roof over our heads. We'd grown up without much, but we always had each other. That was enough, I thought. When I first brought up the idea of going back to school, I expected him to be excited for me, even proud. But instead, his reaction stunned me. "So, what's that supposed to mean?" he asked, eyes narrowing over the coffee mug he clutched like a lifeline. I swallowed, trying to sound as confident as I could. "It means I'll be taking night classes for a degree in engineering. It's what I've wanted for a while now, Dad. You know that." He set down his mug, the look in his eyes hard and unreadable. "So, you're just going to what? Quit your job and dive into school? How are you planning on paying for it all?" I hadn't expected the sudden swell of defensiveness I felt, but there it was. "I've got it figured out. I saved up. I even qualified for some financial aid. It'll be tight, but I think I can make it work." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Oh yeah, sure. And who's going to help me with the house? Who's going to help cover the bills if you're back to being a broke college kid?" My jaw clenched. He was right about the financial strain, but I'd spent years dreaming about this and had finally found the courage to go for it. "Dad, I'm 28. I need to do this for myself. I can't keep putting my life on hold." The silence that followed was like a chasm. He just stared at me, the disappointment rolling off him in waves. And in that moment, I felt like I was back in high school, a kid who couldn't live up to his expectations. "Your life's on hold?" he finally asked, voice low and edged with something I couldn't quite place. "You think I didn't want more? You think I wanted to be working 2 jobs into my 60s? His words stung, and I felt the weight of my guilt settle in. Dad had given up so much for me, and here I was telling him I wanted more. It felt like a betrayal, but this wasn't his life. It was mine, and I couldn't let it slip away. "Dad, I'm not ungrateful. I need to make something of myself." You know how hard it's been for me to find decent work without a degree. This is my chance." He shook his head, looking away. "You think you're better than all that, don't you? Better than this town. Better than the life I've given you?" I took a breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "It's not like that, and you know it. I want to build something. A career. A future. Isn't that what you've always wanted for me?" His gaze softened a little, but his shoulders were still tense, like he was holding back a world of emotions. "And who'll be around to help me? You think you can just up and leave, and I'll be fine? It's been you and me against the world, son. You're all I've got." Those words hit me like a punch. He was all I had, too. Every good memory I had growing up involved him, but somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself in trying to keep us afloat. I was so busy surviving that I'd forgotten how to live. And now, I was realizing that Dad and I were standing on two sides of a canyon, unable to bridge the distance between us. "What about your dreams, Dad?" I asked quietly. "What about what you wanted for yourself?" He shrugged, looking down. "I had dreams, sure. But life happened. I did what I had to do." There it was, the truth I hadn't wanted to confront. His sacrifice. He'd given up so much for me, and now that I had a chance to do something bigger, he couldn't understand why I'd want it. Maybe it felt like I was saying his sacrifices weren't enough, that the life he'd built for us didn't mean anything. I reached out and put my hand over his, trying to bridge the gap. "Dad, I'll still be here. We'll make it work. I can come by on weekends, help out. And when I graduate, I'll get a better job and we'll be better off. Together." He nodded slowly, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. "I just don't want to be alone, son." My heart twisted at his words. I'd never thought of my dad as someone who felt lonely, but in that moment, I saw the reality. He wasn't just worried about losing my help around the house. He was afraid of losing me, and I understood because the thought of leaving him scared me too. "I'm not leaving you, Dad," I said softly. "I'm just trying to find myself. I'll always be here when you need me." He nodded, but the heaviness lingered between us. We sat in silence, each of us wrestling with the weight of our own needs. I could feel the tension, the lingering feeling that neither of us was fully satisfied with the outcome. But we both knew we had to try. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a pang of guilt, knowing I was choosing a path that might take me away from him. But I also felt a spark of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this was the right choice, not just for me, but for both of us in the long run. I needed to grow, to push myself, and I hoped he'd find something for himself, too. Maybe without me there all the time, he'd find his own dreams again. Still, as I left the table that night, I couldn't shake the worry. Was I being selfish, choosing my own future over the person who'd given everything to get me here? I wanted to believe he'd understand someday, that he'd forgive me for wanting more. But sitting here now, staring at my acceptance letter, all I can think is, AITA? I had the best intentions, really. My mom had been working her tail off for months, trying to keep things afloat after my dad's unexpected health issues landed him in the hospital. She never said anything, but I could see how exhausted she was between her job and making sure Dad got to all his appointments. I mean, she was basically carrying everything on her own. So, I figured I'd do something special for her birthday this year to help her relax. Mom's always loved the beach. Growing up, we'd go every summer, and it was her favorite escape. The salty air, the sand, even the crowded boardwalks. She loved all of it. So, I rented a little cottage by the beach for the weekend, thinking it would be the perfect mini vacation. I saved up for weeks, found a place with a beautiful view, and even planned some of her favorite activities. A spa appointment, a nice dinner, and a sunset boat ride. I was so excited, I figured I'd tell her on her birthday and make it a surprise. The morning of her birthday, I baked her favorite chocolate cake. Well, I tried. I'm no baker, but it tasted fine. I called her into the kitchen, had the cake ready with candles, and handed her an envelope with the cottage reservation and everything printed out inside. I could hardly contain my excitement as she opened it, my mind already picturing her thrilled reaction, maybe even tears of happiness. But instead, her face went blank as she looked at the papers. "What's this?" she asked, a bit of confusion and something else. Was it irritation in her voice? "A weekend getaway," I said, grinning, thinking she was just processing the surprise. "I rented a beach cottage for us. I thought it'd be a nice break, and we could spend some time together. You deserve it, Mom. Just you and me relaxing." Her expression didn't change. In fact, she looked disappointed. "You rented this without asking me?" she said, eyebrows knitted together. "Honey, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not sure if you understand how much I have going on." I was stunned. I'd thought of everything, planned it all to the last detail, so she'd have zero stress. "But Mom, that's the whole point. I wanted you to have a break. I know you've been under a lot of pressure, and I thought you'd love the chance to get away for a couple of days." She sighed, clearly exasperated, and that stung. "I don't have the luxury of getting away right now, especially not for a whole weekend. Your father's recovering, I have work deadlines, and there are things around the house that need attention. You're treating this like some fun little holiday idea, but I can't just drop everything, sweetheart." At this point, I could feel the disappointment building up in my chest, but I tried to stay calm. "Mom, I know you're busy, but I thought it might help. You've been doing so much, and I thought this would be a chance for you to, decompress." She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Sometimes it feels like you're doing these things more to feel good about yourself than to actually help. Did you think about asking me if I wanted to go away right now? Or if I even had the time?" That hit like a punch to the gut. I'd spent weeks planning this, stretching my budget, and rearranging my own schedule to be able to give her something nice. And here she was, saying it was all for me? Like I was some selfish kid trying to earn points? I couldn't hide my hurt, so I told her, "Mom, I'm sorry if I got it wrong, but I was just trying to show you I care. You're the one always saying how important family time is, and I thought you'd want to go." But she just shook her head. "I need help, not a vacation right now. You want to show you care? Start by asking what I actually need, not by surprising me with things I don't have the energy for." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was standing there, all but telling me I was selfish for wanting her to take a break. I tried one last time, desperate to make her understand. "Mom, this isn't about me. I thought this was something you'd love, and I wanted to make you happy. That's all." But she just looked at me with this weary expression and said, "I know you meant well, but sometimes good intentions aren't enough. Please, next time, ask first." She left the kitchen then, leaving me standing there in stunned silence, feeling more foolish than ever. I just wanted to do something nice for her, to remind her that someone cares and sees how hard she's working. But instead, she seemed to think I was just trying to get some kind of credit. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered if maybe I'd really missed something big, or if I'd messed it all up somehow. I didn't know what to feel as I stared at the cake, untouched and still sitting on the counter. So, my friends and I had this huge group dinner planned for our old college crew. It's kind of a tradition. Every few months we pick a nice restaurant, catch up on each other's lives, share some laughs, the usual. This time my friend Rachel was planning everything, and we all agreed to go to this Italian place downtown. One of those cozy spots with low lighting and endless breadsticks. Now, don't get me wrong, I like Italian food just fine. But I also just got back from a work trip to Italy, so I was a little burned out on pasta and lasagna. Plus, there's this brand new sushi place I've been dying to try, and I knew no one else had been yet. Figured they'd be excited about it too once they heard. So, a few days before the dinner, I called Rachel up and suggested the change. I said, "Hey, why don't we switch things up and go to this new sushi spot instead? It's supposed to be incredible, with all these interesting rolls and some crazy cool cocktails." Rachel was a little hesitant. She was like, "I thought we already booked the Italian place, and, John doesn't really like sushi." But I waved her off and said, "Come on, it'll be fun. Everyone loves sushi, and John can find something he likes, right? Plus, Italian food is so heavy. We don't want everyone feeling sluggish the whole night." Rachel agreed, though reluctantly, and said she'd let everyone know about the change. I took care of booking a big table at the sushi place, feeling quite pleased with myself. It was bound to be way more memorable than the same old spaghetti and meatballs routine. Besides, I figured nobody would really mind in the end. It was just a restaurant, right? And as far as I was concerned, I just made the whole dinner better. Fast forward to the night of the dinner. I was the first to show up, and I was so excited to try out this place. The restaurant was sleek, modern, with neon lighting and a live DJ spinning beats right there in the corner. Way more interesting than a dimly lit Italian place. I ordered a sake cocktail to get things started while I waited for everyone to arrive. When Rachel showed up, She looked less than thrilled. I greeted her with a big grin and went, "Isn't this place amazing? Aren't you glad we decided to change it up?" She gave me this tight smile and nodded, but I could tell she was still kind of annoyed. Whatever, I thought, she'll lighten up once she gets a drink in her. Then, one by one, everyone else arrived, and I could tell immediately that the excitement wasn't exactly mutual. My friend Sarah looked around and said, "Wait, where's the Italian place?" I laughed it off and told her about the switch, trying to make it sound like a spontaneous, fun idea. But she was like, "I don't really eat raw fish, though." I brushed that off and pointed out that they had a few cooked options, plus some awesome vegetarian rolls. "You'll find something, don't worry. It's not all sushi. Look, they've got these cool noodle dishes and tempura." Then John, who I knew wasn't a sushi fan, walked in. He looked around and just stopped, like he didn't even want to take a step further into the place. "I thought we were going Italian," he said, eyeing the menu with visible distaste. "You know I don't do sushi." I try to smooth things over by joking. "You've just never had good sushi. Tonight's your chance to branch out a little. Come on, live a little." But he just shook his head, looking pretty ticked off, and mumbled something about being allergic to shellfish. At this point, everyone was giving me these looks like I'd committed some kind of culinary crime. Rachel finally said, "You didn't even ask us? We'd all agreed on Italian, but you just changed everything on a whim." I tried to laugh it off and said, "I mean, come on, Italian food is the same everywhere. Why not try something exciting? This place is totally unique. Trust me, you'll all be glad I switched things up." But the table was quiet, and nobody looked like they wanted to even crack a smile. Rachel sighed and muttered, "You made this decision for all of us without even considering what everyone actually wanted." At this point, I felt like they were all blowing things way out of proportion. I mean, what's the big deal? It's just a restaurant swap. They act like I changed the entire meaning of the evening. We were still all together, right? Isn't the point to be with each other, not to fixate on the food? Then, just as the night was finally settling down, the server came by with the check. Without even a blink, everyone immediately handed their bills over, staring me down as they slapped down their share of the cash. I got stuck with the remaining balance. And as it turned out, this trendy place wasn't exactly cheap. I tried to shrug it off, but on the drive home, the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I'd been ganged up on. But even now, I'm still kind of lost about what I did that was so terrible. I wanted to make the night more interesting. That's all. If it was up to them, we'd have gone for a predictable dinner, then spent the evening talking about how tired we all are from work. I just wanted a night that we'd actually remember. So, AITA for trying to keep things exciting? So, here's the situation. My boyfriend, Alex, and I have been planning to attend his best friend's wedding for months. It was a big deal, an out-of-state wedding in a scenic spot on the coast, with all his college friends and some of mine as well. The invitation came months ago, and Alex was so excited. But to me, it seemed like all the planning was mostly him talking about how amazing this wedding would be, how he couldn't wait to reunite with everyone, and how this weekend was going to be epic. I'm not usually one to sweat the details, but there were a lot of logistics, travel arrangements, accommodation, figuring out what we wanted to do in the area outside the wedding, and budgeting since this was going to be an expensive trip. I started nudging Alex to set a plan, but every time I bring it up, he'd wave me off like, "Relax, babe, we'll figure it out closer to the date." I was getting anxious, especially since we were only a few weeks away and still didn't have any solid plans. So one night, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I researched flights, found an Airbnb, checked out some cool local spots to visit, and mapped out our transportation options. I'll admit, I went all out and created a full itinerary. But here's the catch. Alex didn't exactly have a say in any of it. My logic was that he had every opportunity to be involved, and if he couldn't be bothered to plan, well, he shouldn't get to complain about what I put together. So, feeling pretty pleased with myself, I showed Alex the plan. I was expecting some appreciation, maybe even relief. But instead, he looked at me like I'd just told him we were going to Antarctica instead of his best friend's wedding. "Wow," he said, staring at the itinerary. "This is a lot. Like, you planned everything." "Yeah," I said a bit defensively. "I did, because you didn't. But you didn't even ask me if I wanted to do all this stuff," he said, clearly irritated. "Look, I get that I didn't book everything immediately, but I didn't think you'd just go and set up the whole weekend on your own. This isn't even the kind of stuff I'd want to do. Now, I'll admit, the itinerary had some things that maybe weren't exactly up his alley, like a pottery class and a tour of a local vineyard, but I'd also included some downtime and group dinners with his friends. I thought it was balanced, but Alex kept pointing out things he wouldn't have chosen or didn't feel like doing, like a kid being forced to eat his vegetables. That's when I lost my patience. Look, if you had something specific in mind, you should have said so instead of blowing me off every time I brought it up. You left all the planning to me, and now you're complaining. He threw his hands up, maybe because I didn't think we needed a whole itinerary. Maybe I just wanted to go with the flow, you know? It's my best friend's wedding. Half the weekend's already set with wedding stuff. The rest of the time, I just wanted to catch up with friends, maybe do a beach day. Great. I shot back, feeling my face heat up. So, I guess I'm just supposed to sit around while you go hang out with your friends? Oh, come on, he said, exasperated. Don't make it sound like I'm abandoning you. I thought we'd both be able to do our own thing here and there, without sticking to some rigid plan. His words stung, and something in me snapped. Fine, if my planning's such a problem, then maybe I just shouldn't go. Then you can hang out with your friends as much as you want without worrying about me sticking to a plan. He looked shocked. You're seriously saying you don't want to go now? Yeah, maybe I am, I said, crossing my arms. Honestly, if you can't appreciate the effort I put in, maybe you should just go solo and see how well your go-with-the-flow attitude works. He stared at me for a second, and then, in the most infuriatingly calm voice, he said, fine, if that's what you want. I wasn't expecting that. I thought he'd argue, try to convince me to come, maybe even apologize. But he just got up, walked into the other room, and didn't come back out until I heard him on the phone with someone, telling them he'd probably be coming alone now. And that was it. I held my ground, partly out of anger, partly out of pure stubbornness. But the closer we got to the date, the more I started feeling this gnawing regret. I missed out on an entire weekend in a beautiful place. A weekend where we could have had fun together if we just found a way to meet halfway. The wedding came and went. Alex had a great time, of course, and when he got back, he didn't gloat about it. He didn't even seem angry. He just said, I really wish you'd been there. And that hurt more than if he'd yelled at me. So now I'm left here wondering if maybe I pushed too hard. Should I have let him take the lead, even if it meant fewer plans? Or was I justified in wanting some structure? Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was the one who made this trip into a battle. I'll be honest, I thought I was just being funny. Rick, my cubicle neighbor, was always ranting about how he couldn't get any work done because of the ridiculous noise level in our open office. I swear, he even wore those big, noise-canceling headphones at his desk sometimes, even if no one was talking. One time, he told me in a totally serious tone, "It's so loud here, I could hear someone blinking." Anyway, the idea came to me while I was watching him adjust his headphones for the 100th time that morning. I thought I'd leave him a little gift to lighten him up. So I bought a small box of disposable earplugs and left them on his desk with a note. For your poor, sensitive ears. Not bad, right? Just a small, funny gesture. He'd get a laugh, maybe even put them to use, and that would be that. When he got to his desk and saw the box, though, he didn't laugh. He stared at it like it was an insult wrapped in bright orange foam. He turned around, fixed me with an icy stare, and muttered, "Hilarious." Then he dropped them in the trash. Okay, so maybe I misjudged. I shrugged it off. But then later that afternoon, I noticed something odd on my desk. A framed picture of Rick wearing those ridiculous headphones. He must have snuck into my phone or dug through my files because it was a photo I'd taken at a work party and saved as a joke. He'd printed it out, framed it, and left it there as some kind of "I'm watching you" message. The way he just casually set it on my desk, staring at me with a smug grin, rubbed me the wrong way. I'll admit I took it personally. I mean, come on, he couldn't take a joke? If that was how he wanted to play, fine. Two could play. The next day, I plastered his desk with bright yellow Post-it notes. His entire workspace looked like an ad for a sticky note company. I mean, I went all out. Notes on his monitor, his chair, his keyboard, his mouse, even under his headphones. It took him a full 20 minutes to peel everything off, and I got more than a few snickers from the team. He stormed over to my desk after that, lips pressed together, barely holding in his rage. "Real mature, man," he said, his voice tight. Some of us are here to work, not act like middle schoolers. I could tell he was fuming, and maybe that should have been my cue to back off, but his irritation just spurred me on. I couldn't stop myself. His anger only fueled the fun. I decided to keep pushing. I snuck a rubber spider into his lunch bag the next day. A cheap trick, I know, but I couldn't help myself. When he found it, he jumped out of his chair, nearly dropping his lunch all over the break room floor. I laughed, probably harder than I should have. But instead of brushing it off or even laughing back, Rick just glared at me, his face red. "Keep it up, man. You'll regret it," he hissed under his breath. That should have been my sign to quit. But in my mind, I was just winning our little prank war. That afternoon, though, things escalated. When I went to log back into my computer after lunch, my password wouldn't work. I tried again and again. Nothing. After a half hour of troubleshooting with IT, they told me my account had been locked for multiple unsuccessful login attempts. My day was shot, and I had to explain to my boss why I couldn't access my own files. I knew this was Rick's doing. I stormed over to his desk, ready to throw down, but he just leaned back in his chair with that smug smile and said, "Oh, sorry. Thought you'd appreciate the extra challenge today." Now it was personal. I felt like I was 2 inches tall as I slinked back to my desk with my pride bruised. If he thought I was backing down, he was wrong. I was done with little pranks. I was going all out. That night, I stayed late and went through every email draft I could find with his name on it. Then I did it. I scheduled an email with his name in the from line with a little surprise announcement for our team. The next morning, right around 9 a.m., everyone's inbox lit up with an email from Rick announcing his intention to pursue his dream of becoming a professional gamer. In the message, he talked about leaving this dead-end job and signing up for hours of Call of Duty training. I thought it was funny, and I'd only send it to the office. He'd get a laugh, maybe see how far he'd push me. But when Rick came in, he looked at his computer, then at me, and all the color drained from his face. "What the hell did you do?" he asked, shaking. "Did you send this to corporate?" Apparently, the email had been forwarded to HR by one of the managers who thought it was a legitimate resignation letter. Within an hour, Rick was called in for a departure interview. He was livid. He stormed back to his desk, face flushed, and grabbed his things. "Is this funny to you?" he demanded, glaring at me with actual tears in his eyes. "You just put my job on the line. For what a joke." I felt a pang of regret, but I shrugged it off. I told myself he was overreacting, that he'd fix it with HR, and everything would go back to normal. But it didn't. The next week, Rick put in an official complaint against me, detailing harassment and a hostile work environment. I was hauled into the boss's office for a serious talk and had to sit through an appropriate workplace behavior seminar, with the boss's eyes boring holes into me the entire time. The prank war died that day, but things never went back to normal. Rick stopped talking to me altogether, didn't even look in my direction when we passed in the halls. My boss seemed to lose faith in me too, giving me fewer responsibilities and looking at me like I was some immature kid who couldn't handle himself. I'd only meant to make things fun around the office. I never expected it to get so personal, and I definitely never meant to put Rick's job at risk. Now he's distant. The team sees me as a troublemaker, and my boss has made it clear that I need to mature if I want to be taken seriously. Looking back, maybe I should have stopped when he put the photo on my desk. Maybe I went too far, but it was just jokes, wasn't it? I stumbled into the whole mess on a Friday, of all days. Fridays are sacred. You're supposed to coast into the weekend, leave your worries at the door, but instead, I was about to find out more than I bargained for about my best friend, Jake. Jake and I go way back. We've been inseparable since middle school, the kind of friends who can go months without talking and then pick up right where we left off. Lately, though, he'd seemed off. He'd cancel plans at the last minute, answer texts with one-word replies, barely laugh at my jokes, which is practically a friendship red flag. But Jake's always been private, so I gave him his space, figuring he'd come to me when he was ready. Anyway, that Friday, I was at his place. He was in the shower, so I was just scrolling through my phone trying to ignore the mess in his living room. There were a few overdue bills scattered on the table. One with big, bold letters saying "Final Notice." Then I noticed his laptop was open. Out of sheer habit, my eyes glanced over the screen. He had an email open from some payday loan company, and they were threatening legal action if he didn't pay up by the end of the week. I felt this tight knot form in my stomach. I knew Jake had been struggling with his job lately. He worked as a freelance writer, and work had been slow. He complained about clients not paying him on time. But this? Seeing those overdue bills, the loan threats, it hit hard. It was like discovering this whole other side of him that he'd been trying to hide. When he came out, I couldn't just ignore it. I mean, that's what friends are for, right? To step up when things are falling apart. Even if the other person doesn't want to admit it. Hey man, I noticed some bills on the table. I said, trying to keep my tone casual. Are you doing okay with everything? You know, financially? The second the words left my mouth, his face dropped. I'd seen Jake angry before, but this was different. He looked at me like I'd betrayed him. Oh, so now you're snooping through my stuff? His voice was sharp, bitter. No, it wasn't like that. I stammered, caught completely off guard. I saw it on the table. I got worried, that's all. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, sure. You just happened to notice all my private business lying around. Huh? I was scrambling now, trying to backpedal. Look, I didn't mean to invade your space. I just want to help. If things are tight, maybe I could lend you some money. No strings attached. But that only made him angrier. So now I'm some charity case to you? He shook his head, his eyes full of a hurt that I hadn't anticipated. I don't need you to swoop in and save me. I've been handling my own problems just fine, thanks. But, Jake, I tried to explain, my voice sounding small even to my own ears. It didn't look like you were handling it. I mean, those bills, the loan notice, I trailed off, realizing how bad this was sounding. He crossed his arms, shutting me out entirely. I can't believe this. You know, you always think you're the helpful friend, but sometimes you're just pushing too far. Not everything is your business, all right? The worst part was he wasn't wrong. Jake's always had this quiet pride, this fierce independence that makes him feel like any help is a handout. But I'd thought maybe, just this once, he'd let me be there for him. Instead, he'd taken my concern as something ugly, invasive. The silence between us was heavy, thick with everything I didn't know how to say. He wouldn't even look at me. After a minute, I mumbled, I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I thought I was helping. He gave a bitter shrug. Well, don't. I didn't ask for it. And just like that, it was like a wall went up between us. On the way home, my mind was spinning. I kept going over it all, wondering if I'd really overstepped. Was it wrong to try and help just because I'd seen him struggling? He's my best friend. How could I just sit by and do nothing? But maybe I'd underestimated how much his independence mattered to him. Maybe, to him, offering help was like saying he wasn't good enough to handle his own life. I wanted to make things right, but every time I thought about texting him, the memory of his hurt expression stopped me. Maybe he just needed time, or maybe I'd messed things up beyond fixing. I don't know. I still can't shake the feeling that I was just trying to do the right thing. But now I'm left here wondering, with this gnawing sense of guilt and a friendship hanging in the balance. AITA? My cousin Ryan has always been like a brother to me. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, and even ended up working in similar fields after college. Ryan's always been the funny, charismatic guy who could walk into any room and charm just about anyone. But there's one area of his life that's always been complicated, and that's his relationship with money. Ryan's the kind of guy who would spend his last dollar on a round of drinks for everyone and not think twice about it. He's generous to a fault, but he's also impulsive, and he never really learned to manage his finances. He's gotten himself into some tricky situations over the years, from credit card debt to borrowing money he couldn't pay back. We all hoped that once he got older and had a stable income, he'd settle down a bit. A few months ago, Ryan and his girlfriend, Kim, decided to buy a house together. Kim's amazing, and she's been so good for Ryan. She's organized, financially savvy, and has always been patient with his quirks. Honestly, we all thought she might be the one to help him get his finances in order. So when they announced that they'd been approved for a mortgage, everyone was thrilled for them. Ryan threw a big barbecue to celebrate, and he was practically glowing with pride. But when we sat down to talk about it one-on-one, he mentioned a few details that immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. Apparently, they'd gone in with a minimal down payment, and he'd tweaked some details on his income to get the approval. He told me how they were planning to renovate the kitchen and maybe add a deck out back once they moved in, saying things like, We'll figure out the money stuff as we go, and it'll all work out. He even joked about starting a side hustle to cover the extra expenses. I could feel a lump forming in my stomach as he talked. This was Ryan all over, thinking things would magically fall into place without a plan. I tried to shake the feeling off, but I couldn't ignore it. I knew him too well, and I knew this could end up in disaster. Over the next week, the worry gnawed at me until I finally decided I had to say something. I loved Ryan, and I didn't want to see him lose everything or drag Kim down with him because he was getting in over his head. I told myself that if I approached it gently, he'd understand I was just looking out for him. So, one evening, I invited him over for a beer and eased into the conversation. "Hey, Ree," I said casually, "I was thinking about what you were saying the other day about the house and the renos and all. Are you sure you're ready for all that?" He gave me a look halfway between amusement and confusion. "What do you mean?" "I told you, we got it covered." "I know, and that's awesome," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I just want to make sure you're going into this with all the bases covered. You know, it's a huge commitment, and I know things haven't always been smooth with money. I just want you to be okay." His face darkened instantly, and he set his beer down with a hard thud. "You think I can't handle this?" No, it's not that," I said quickly, sensing the tension. "I know you can handle it, Ree. I just know this is a big deal, and you don't want to start out behind on something that should be a fresh start." He shook his head, laughing bitterly. "So, what? You're here to tell me how to manage my money now? Like you're my dad or something?" "Ryan, that's not what I'm trying to do," I said, feeling the frustration creeping in. "I'm just trying to help you avoid." "I don't need your help," he interrupted, his voice cold. "I've been managing just fine on my own, thanks. Not everyone has it all figured out like you, all right?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Ryan, I'm saying this because I care about you. I've seen you get burned before, and I just don't want to see you struggle." He scoffed, standing up to leave. "Well, thanks for the concern, but I don't need your pity. Maybe if you trusted me a little, you'd realize I'm not a screw-up." With that, he walked out, leaving me sitting there alone, feeling like I'd somehow betrayed him by even bringing it up. I wanted to call him back, to explain that I only said something because I wanted him to succeed, not because I thought he couldn't. But I was hurt too. He'd thrown my words back in my face, making me feel like I was the bad guy for trying to protect him. The next few weeks were rough. He stopped responding to my texts and made excuses whenever I tried to meet up. Our family noticed the tension, and when someone finally asked if something had happened, I just shrugged it off, not wanting to get into it. I kept wondering if I should have just kept my mouth shut, let him figure it out on his own. But I kept picturing him in debt again, losing everything he and Kim were building, and feeling that same stubborn guilt every time. A month later, I found out from Kim that Ryan had missed their first mortgage payment. She didn't know all the details, but she was stressed and scrambling to cover the shortfall. When she mentioned it to me, I could feel my chest tighten. I wanted to tell her that I'd tried to warn him, that I'd done my best to protect him from this. But I just nodded and listened, swallowing my frustration and guilt. It hurt to know that I'd done everything I could, and it hadn't made any difference. So now I'm stuck. Ryan still isn't really speaking to me, and I don't know if I made things worse by speaking up. Part of me feels like I did what a friend, a brother, should do. But the other part feels like I overstepped, like I let my fear of him getting hurt cloud my judgment. All right, picture this. It's me and Sam, my boyfriend, standing in our living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes, bubble wrap, and a dozen open tabs on our laptops about moving essentials. We're both staring down the barrel of a cross-country move. New city, new jobs, new everything. And we're coming at it from opposite ends of the planning spectrum. I'm a big-picture person. Give me a checklist, and I'll organize the heck out of it. Color-coded spreadsheets, moving budget breakdowns, timelines. Those are my love language. If I can get everything squared away ahead of time, then I'll feel calm going into the move. Meanwhile, Sam's the complete opposite. "Let's just get the basics packed and take it as it comes," he says. He's all about flexibility, trusting that things will work out if we don't stress every detail. And here's where things start getting messy. I suggested we divide and conquer. I'd handle getting quotes from moving companies, researching neighborhoods, and all the other advanced planning tasks. I showed him my tentative schedule, complete with little gaps for when we'd sit down to finalize things like the exact date to move and which boxes would go where. Sam laughed, not unkindly, but in a way that made me feel like I'd just shown him a math problem he didn't understand. "Do we really need to get this specific already?" he asked, smiling at me. "I just don't see why we can't pack gradually and figure out the details along the way. I mean, we have a whole month." I took a breath, trying not to get defensive. "Sam, if we leave things up in the air, we're going to get to moving week and realize we're totally unprepared. A little structure now will make everything easier later." He shrugged. "Yeah, but you're stressing out so much trying to plan every tiny detail. I just want us to actually enjoy this process, you know? Here's the thing, I do see his point. Sam's way would probably be a lot more enjoyable and less stressful in theory. But the idea of not knowing exactly where we're going to live, when we're going to pack certain things, or even which mover we're using, it makes me feel like I'm in free fall." Over the next few days, our different approaches kept clashing. I'd mention how I was researching which part of the city might be best for us, and Sam would laugh and say, "We can just rent a place for a few months and decide later." When I finally found a moving company that offered a good rate, he said, "We don't need to book this far out. We'll probably find a better deal if we wait a couple of weeks." It was infuriating because I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the only one taking this seriously. To me, having a clear plan meant we'd both get to feel secure in the change, knowing we had all our bases covered. For him, the endless lists and bookings were just a bunch of stress we didn't need. I tried to meet him halfway. I really did. I stopped nagging about booking the movers and agreed to wait to look at apartments until we actually got to the city. But every time I tried to be more laid back, the anxiety crept up on me. It wasn't about the actual tasks. It was more like a voice in my head saying, "If you don't handle this now, you're going to regret it later." One night, as we were packing up the dishes, I brought it up again. I told him, as calmly as I could, that the unknowns were really getting to me. "Babe," I said, setting down a stack of bubble wrap, "I get that you want this to be relaxed and all, but I'm struggling here. I feel like if we don't plan this out, it'll be chaos once we're actually in the middle of it." Sam put his hand on mine, his face softening. "I get that, but can you try to trust me a bit? Not everything has to be locked down to the minute. We're moving together, and we're going to figure it out together. It'll be fine, I promise." In my head, I wanted to say yes and lean into that trust, but there was a part of me that just couldn't do it. I nodded and tried to look reassured, but the need to prepare, to have that safety net, just wouldn't go away. The funny thing is, Sam was putting in some effort to help me feel comfortable with his approach. One night, he printed out a list of things we'd absolutely have to do, like setting up the utilities, changing our address, stuff like that, and taped it to the fridge. He told me that for the non-essentials, we'd just handle them as they came up, and that we'd do it together. It was sweet, and I could see he was trying, but a small part of me was still thinking, this isn't enough. We ended up taking a few mini breaks from talking about the move entirely because, to be honest, it was starting to make us both resentful. When I mentioned I'd made another updated timeline, Sam actually said, "Can we just do something else for tonight? This stuff is stressing me out." I never heard him sound frustrated like that before, and it hurt a lot. I wanted him to be as invested in the details as I was, but I realized then that our visions of a successful move were completely different. As the weeks ticked down, we did try to balance things out. I managed to lock down the essentials, the move-in date, some short-term storage options, and a few other big pieces. For the smaller details, I agreed to trust the process, as Sam likes to say, and let some things go until we were closer to the actual move. We've had fewer arguments since then, and I'd like to say I've relaxed a bit, but honestly, I'm still secretly running through all the things we might be missing. Sometimes, I wonder if this move will turn into a massive "I told you so," where everything falls apart without my list to hold us up. Sam, on the other hand, seems genuinely happier, and I can see he's excited about the possibilities, dreaming about decorating, exploring new neighborhoods, and finding our favorite coffee spot. I wish I could have that same carefree mindset, but instead, I'm mentally adding fine coffee shop to my ever-growing list. So here we are, both trying to compromise, but neither totally letting go of our own approach. I keep wondering if it's just me being rigid or if he's too casual for something this big. I'm genuinely torn because, as much as I want to be flexible, part of me thinks my way really is the only way to avoid future chaos. My heart pounded as I looked down at Gus, my 12-year-old golden retriever, curled up on the worn rug by the fireplace, his favorite spot. He was slowing down, that was clear, but it wasn't until 2 weeks ago that his health took a sudden and harsh turn. The vet's face was serious as she gave us the diagnosis: an aggressive tumor pressing against his spine. Surgery could extend his life, maybe even by a year or two. But it wouldn't be easy. There was a real risk of complications, and he'd need intensive recovery time. Yet without it, we'd be lucky if he saw another 6 months. I didn't hesitate. Let's do it. I'll make sure he gets through it. I could feel that rush of commitment rising in me. Gus was my best friend. I'd had him since he was a floppy-eared puppy who would stumble over his own paws. I was ready to pay whatever it took, rearrange my whole schedule, whatever he needed. But my partner, Lisa, hesitated. She reached out to scratch behind Gus's ear, and he leaned his head in her hand, sighing, his eyes cloudy but still full of trust. She looked up at me, her expression pained. "Are you sure, Sam?" "Yes," I replied a bit too quickly, trying to sound certain. She paused, biting her lip. "I know you love him. I do too. But, Sam, he's 12. That's old for a retriever. What if this just makes things worse for him?" I looked down at Gus, who was watching us both, oblivious to the gravity of the decision hovering over his head. "But if we don't try, we're just letting him go. Isn't that worse?" Lisa was quiet, her hand still on Gus's head. "I don't want to lose him either," she said softly. "But I also don't want his last months to be nothing but hospitals and pain. I don't want to put him through that just so we can have him around a little longer." Her words hit me hard, and for a moment, I felt like she'd just called me selfish. But I could see her eyes were brimming with tears, her voice trembling. She was scared too, just as scared as I was of losing him. I swallowed, feeling a knot in my stomach as I realized this wasn't going to be the kind of decision with a clear right answer. For the next few days, we danced around each other, quietly retreating into our own camps. I started reading everything I could find about canine cancer, scouring forums, looking for stories about dogs that had beaten the odds. Each success story felt like fuel, a reason to keep fighting. I'd show them to Lisa, pointing out the dogs who'd lived for years after their surgeries. But each time, she'd listen, then ask, "And what about the ones who didn't? What if he's not one of the lucky ones?" It hurt hearing her say it, but I understood. Lisa was practical, level-headed. Gus adored her. He'd always had a sixth sense for finding her when she was upset, putting his big head on her lap like he was trying to soak up her worries. She wasn't doing this to be cruel. She wanted what was best for him. A few nights later, we had a talk with the vet together. She didn't give us false hope. She said Gus was strong, but the tumor was in a sensitive area. Surgery could help, but it could also cause damage, potentially leaving him with nerve issues or chronic pain. "So, we try?" I asked, though my voice wavered. The vet gave us a sympathetic smile. "I can't make this decision for you, but I will say that it's clear how much you love him, both of you. If you go forward with it, it's because you're giving him a fighting chance. If you don't, that's not giving up. It's letting him be comfortable, knowing you did everything you could to make his last months good ones." Lisa squeezed my hand as we left, and the warmth of her grip helped ease some of my fear. I could feel her bracing herself, her way of silently saying, "I'm with you, whatever we choose." But we still didn't have an answer. I lay awake that night, replaying the vet's words, staring at the ceiling as Gus snored softly beside the bed. I started imagining a life without him, trying to picture the mornings without him nudging me awake, the empty space in the back seat of the car where he'd usually be, head out the window, ears flapping. I couldn't accept that. Not yet. In the morning, I looked over at Lisa, who was watching Gus sleep, her face a mix of sadness and tenderness. "I want to go through with it," I said, breaking the silence. Her eyes stayed on Gus as she nodded, slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "But, Sam, if this ends up hurting him more than helping, promise me you'll know when to let go." I swallowed, tears prickling in my eyes. "I promise. I just need to know I did everything I could." So we scheduled the surgery. I'd never felt more terrified and relieved at the same time. In the days leading up to it, we doted on Gus like he was a puppy again, taking him to his favorite park, feeding him extra treats, letting him sleep on the bed even though he'd taken over the whole middle, making us sleep on the edges like we were his guests. The surgery day came, and we took him to the clinic. Saying goodbye as they took him into the back was brutal. I could feel Lisa's hand trembling in mine, and she whispered, "He'll be okay," more to herself than to me. We sat in the waiting room for what felt like an eternity, each lost in our own thoughts, staring at the wall and flinching every time the door opened. When the vet finally came out, her expression was cautious. "He made it through," she said, but there was a hesitation. "He'll need some time to see how he recovers, but he's stable." Relief and anxiety warred inside me, and I could see the same battle in Lisa's eyes. We visited him every day as he started his slow recovery, each time hoping for a little more of his old self to show. But the progress was painfully slow. There were days when he was listless, his once bright eyes tired, and every time I felt a pang of guilt. But then there'd be a day where he'd perk up, his tail thumping softly when he saw us, or he'd lean into us like he always did, and it felt like maybe, just maybe, we'd made the right call. It's been 2 months since then, and he's back home with us, still a little weaker, but slowly finding his old habits again. He's even started nudging us awake in the mornings, demanding his breakfast and barking at the squirrels outside. I catch glimpses of the Gus I've known for years, and I feel a rush of hope, a small voice telling me that we made the right choice. But there are still moments, like when he's lying quietly, looking at me with those eyes that seem wise beyond anything I'll ever understand, when I wonder if I did this for him or for me. If I kept him here just to avoid the heartbreak of losing him, even if it meant making him endure so much. Lisa never says anything, but sometimes I catch her watching him with a pained expression, as if she's wondering the same thing. So now I'm asking, not just myself, but all of you, am I selfish? AITA for choosing to hold on to him, even if I can't be certain he wanted to fight this battle? Alright, here's what happened at my sister's birthday dinner last weekend. Looking back, I don't think I was out of line, but now everyone's acting all weird with me, so here's the story. My sister, Becca, just turned 30, and she planned this nice little family dinner at her favorite restaurant. She invited a few close friends too, so it was a bit of a mixed crowd. Everyone was there to celebrate her, which, I mean, obviously it was her birthday, so fair enough. But I couldn't help but notice how everyone kept gushing over her. Apparently, she'd just been promoted to Senior Regional Marketing Specialist at this retail chain she's worked for since college. Now, don't get me wrong, proud older sibling here. But Senior Regional Marketing Specialist? Really? I mean, good for her, but it's not like she's the CEO or running her own company or anything. I've honestly just had a harder time getting to where I am, and that deserves some recognition too, right? So, when Becca started talking about her promotion, I thought it was a great chance to join the conversation. I mean, if we're talking about work accomplishments, then why not share my own experiences? So I casually mentioned how it's been a real journey for me too, given that I had to build my business from scratch with no safety net. I said something like, "It's amazing you got promoted. Retail is tough. I bet it's not easy to climb the ladder there, especially with all the changes in the industry. I know when I started my own company, every day felt like survival mode. I thought I was showing solidarity. I just wanted to show that I understood hard work." Becca gave me a kind of forced smile and said, "Yeah, it's definitely been challenging, but I'm proud of how far I've come." Which was great. She should be proud. But people are always acting like her work is this massive deal, while I'm the one constantly on my feet, putting out fires, managing everything alone. The conversation moved on, but then Becca's friend Amy brought up how Becca's been juggling her promotion with taking online classes. Now, I don't mean to brag, but I did 4 years of night school while working 50-hour weeks when I was her age. I figured it was okay to mention that, so I said, "Yeah, that's awesome, Becca. Online classes are no joke." I remember my own school days while working full-time. Sometimes I had to pull all-nighters to keep up. I laughed a bit, hoping she'd laugh too. She didn't. Instead, she just looked down at her plate and said, "Well, it's a lot, but I'm doing what I can." So then my mom, probably sensing the awkwardness, started talking about how she'd been so impressed with Becca's focus. She said something like, "It's amazing to see you so committed, sweetie. You're really doing great." That was nice to hear, but I was sitting there thinking, okay, but can we acknowledge that I've been through this too? Maybe even a bit tougher? So I chimed in saying, yeah, Becca, you're doing fantastic. I think it's amazing to balance work and study. I just know from experience that it can really drain you. I remember getting my degree while working, and it honestly built a lot of resilience in me. My mom shot me a quick look, but I didn't think much of it. I figured everyone was just having a long night. And hey, it was her birthday. I didn't want to make her feel overshadowed, but I thought sharing my own experiences would just give her some extra encouragement, like showing her that it's worth it, you know? But then things took a bit of a turn. Becca's friend, Rachel, who's known us since we were kids, said something like, hey, I remember all that, but this is Becca's night. Let's not turn it into a work competition. She laughed, so I thought she was joking, but there was an edge to it. I figured, okay, maybe she doesn't get that I was just contributing to the conversation, not competing. After that, Becca seemed a bit down, and I started to feel a little awkward. But I hadn't said anything wrong, had I? All I did was point out that I've been through similar challenges. I was just talking about my own life, my own perspective. I wasn't saying Becca's achievements weren't important, just that I understand what it's like to work hard too. And honestly, I thought that would make her feel better, knowing I could relate. As we were getting ready to leave, Becca pulled me aside and she looked, well, not angry exactly, but definitely serious. She said, look, I get that you've worked hard too, but every time I talk about my accomplishments, it feels like you're always trying to remind me that you've done more. I just wanted one night where I could talk about my success without feeling like I had to measure up to you. I didn't know what to say at first because it caught me off guard. I was just sharing my story. It's not my fault if my journey happened to be more complicated or, well, a bit more intense. So I said, I'm sorry if it came off that way, but I was only sharing my own experiences. You know I'm proud of you. I just wanted to relate, show you that I understand what hard work looks like. She shook her head. It didn't feel like you were relating. It felt like you were competing. And honestly, it was hurtful. I kind of laughed it off, hoping it would ease the tension. Becca, come on. You know I'd never try to make you feel that way. I'm just saying we both work hard. And if I can share my perspective, why shouldn't I? But she just sighed and said, maybe next time, just let me have my moment without making it about how you did it better. I walked away from that conversation feeling confused, like isn't it okay to talk about my own experiences, especially when they're so similar? I honestly didn't think I was making it about me. I just wanted her to know that I get it, that she's not alone, and that I've been through tough times too. Now, Becca's been a bit cold, and my mom called me yesterday to say she thinks I need to apologize for downplaying Becca's night. But I really don't think I did that. All I did was tell the truth and share my own journey. How is that a bad thing? So now I'm here asking, am I missing something? AITA?